In today's video, I'm going to break down the biggest mistakes that anglers made in 2022 and ways that you can avoid them going into next season. Let's dive into this thing. So this video really comes together in reflection of the 2022 season. Things that went well, things that went poorly, and things that we wish we would have improved on in the moment to help us maximize our time on the water. And actually, my buddy Nathan just left my house. We were pouring up a bunch of baits. Net heads, drop shot weights, some jigs, baits that we go through quite a few of in a season. And we got to talking about the season. And I really want to bring this to you guys because I think it's interesting to hear our reflection on the year and kind of give you guys some things to think about as well. Look back on your season and say, did I do this? What could I have done better? And what are some things that maybe I didn't think about that I can be better at next season? There are 4 main tips that I want to share with you guys that I think will help you be better anglers next season. And the first one is that anglers didn't cover enough water this year. And this is something I was never very good at. This is something that I would consider a weakness of mine, is really being able to cover water effectively. And when I say effectively, like fish through areas and find active fish. I'm very good at fishing a lot of different spots, but I don't think I really target active fish effectively. I fish areas very slowly. One thing that Caleb did, especially when he was up here in the spring, is we really covered a lot of water and figured out where the active fish were at and were able to pattern that around the lake. And what it really gave me the insight to do throughout the year was start to look for new spots. Be willing to fish faster moving baits to look for a bite, and I can really dial that spot in. But what was really unique about that trip and what I learned from him coming up here in the spring was that you can fish moderately fast moving baits and get an aggressive fish to bite out of that area and then really maximize that spot by throwing slower moving baits. So by covering more water, we were able to put together the start of a pattern rather than going out there with something in mind of what those fish necessarily were going to be on, the hot bait, the key bait for the trip, and then really start to find the fish from there. So kind of a reverse thinking from the way that I normally approach going to the lake. And it really panned out and allowed me to find some new areas this year. It allowed me to break down new bodies of water, try new techniques, and have a lot better season because I was willing to cover more water to find active fish and then really break those areas down. Which leads us nicely into point 2, which is maximizing fish in an area. So when Caleb came up here and we were able to look for those aggressive fish in a spot, we then could take slower moving baits or more finesse style baits or different techniques and really break down the area and maximize the amount of bites that we were able to get. Really fish through high percentage spots where we know fish were located and dial it in, which is something that we did all year long. My buddy Nathan is phenomenal at doing this, really sitting on a spot, catching as many fish as he possibly can. And this is something that I've started to pride myself in, is really maximizing a spot once I know there are fish there. But by being able to cover water, then I could sit there and really start to dial it in. And I really took that to heart this year. Really figuring out why fish are where they are, what they're doing there, the key bait, and find out alternative baits or what happens when conditions change to maximize that spot on another day. So I think this goes beyond just maximizing the fish for that day. It goes into understanding that spot, on the spot, on the spot, on the bait to have success multiple days in a row, which is really, really unique. And this is something I'm proud of the 22 season. Now, one thing that I'm not super proud of and a mistake that I think I made was that I always try to look for the sneakiest spots on the lake, which is point number 3. You don't have to look for something out of the ordinary all of the time. Now, there are times where you're going to find a secret spot that no one knows about that's holding fish that only you can catch. But most of the time, community holes are community holes for a reason. And it's because there are fish there, and they're because there are big fish there, typically. And this is something that I'm not very good at, and something that I wish I would have done more effectively this season. And Nathan really brought this up because he had a lot of tournament success this year, and a lot of his tournament successes came on his ability to fish obvious areas with different baits to catch fish that other guys were missing. Versus what I try to do, I'm like, man, I want to go fish an area no one's ever touched, no one's ever fished, and figure out how to catch those fish that are there. When a lot of times people don't fish there because there aren't very many fish there or because they're very tough to catch. So kind of going into 23, I would love to see myself start to be able to look at a lake and say, man, this area looks good. Man, this is a community hole. Why is it a community hole? What makes it good? And being able to fish those areas and kind of put that pride to the side. I don't always have to find the sneaky spot, the sneaky lake, the sneaky area, the sneaky bait, and just fish the obvious. And this is something that I see in myself over the years. Like, I always try to push myself to do something different or out of the ordinary. Or, you know, I was fishing Lake Huron when Lake Huron was a little bit less popular, and I kind of shied away from it because it started gaining in popularity, which is like, makes no sense. So put your pride to the side. You don't always have to do something special or sneaky or specific or do something different than what everyone else is doing. Just be willing to fish the obvious and really break it down, because that's the way that you can have a lot of success. You can learn, and maybe it's going to clue you in on a pattern that you then can apply to find the sneaky stuff. So that's one of those topics that has kind of caught my interest that Nathan brought up to me today, was that I'm not very good at fishing the obvious. And he is very good at fishing the obvious and maximizing it for everything that it's worth. And then number 4 is really pay attention to the minuscule details, the tiny details that can make the difference between a good day into one of the best days you've ever had. And this is something that happened this spring again with Caleb here. It happened towards the very end of the season in a tournament that I was fishing. But we paid attention to tiny details like wind direction, current direction that was flowing across the spot that made all the difference between those fish being there and not being there. The way that we were retrieving the bait, our line sizes. Nathan and I had a discussion today where we had a day where we were both fishing the same bait with just a different trailer and a different color of trailer, but he outfished me like 5-10 to 1 because his trailer was a different color and it stood up off the bottom because it was Z-Man floating plastic as opposed to a bait that didn't float. We had a discussion about that tournament where I was fishing 6-pound test line with my little finesse swim jig, and he was fishing 10-pound test line. Well, what the difference was, my 6-pound test sank. It kept my bait lower and more connected to the bottom, which allowed me to catch more fish, and his 10-pound test had more line drag, so his bait was coming up off the bottom more, so he couldn't get the same cadence that I was fishing. Like, noticing these minuscule details allowed us to have differing experiences on the water, but because we noticed these things, we were able to dial in our pattern and really figure it out. Special bites. When Caleb came up here this spring, we figured out that we had to fish the outside edges of the grass, the outside edges of these drop-offs, turn off the graphs, and what Caleb did is throw straight 6-pound test fluorocarbon, and I threw 8 to 6-pound test fluorocarbon with a super long leader. And like these tiny details and the way we were fishing our hair jig and where we were fishing them and what we were doing on the lake helped turn our trip from like what would have been a great trip into one of the best trips of my life. Caleb caught that 7-pounder. I caught 2 6-pounders. We had over 30 pounds for our best 5 for the weekend, which is unreal. And so it's these tiny details that we notice when we talk about and we start to pay attention to that make the difference between good days and great days. And it's something that I think a lot of anglers often overlook. They say, man, I'm throwing my jig on 20-pound test and you're throwing yours on 15. It doesn't make that big of a difference. Or my swim bait is like your swim bait. It's the same size head, same bait. But if you have different line size, different rod action, there's little details that can change your successes on the water. Or for example, fish only get on this spot when you have a certain current blowing across it. If we don't notice that detail, we don't catch fish there. Or we don't make the decision to go fish there. Or why are only small fish on this reef? And there's so many different details and experiences that I can give you throughout the year, but to me that one's going to probably stick with me the most out of all 4 of these. So number 1, I encourage you guys to be willing to cover more water. Be willing to look for active, aggressive fish as opposed to trying to catch every fish out of a single spot, because it's going to allow you to really start to dial in a pattern more effectively. Then once you do catch a fish out of that spot, that's when you can sit down and maximize that area. That's something I feel really comfortable with. That's something I feel like I do pretty decently, is understand a spot on a spot, but I don't cover water quite as effectively as I would have liked. Point number 3 would be to be willing to fish the obvious. Don't have to always be the sneakiest person on the lake. And point number 4 is pay attention to those little details that can make all the difference in the world. So hopefully these 4 tips will give you guys some insight into your 2022 season. Maybe you guys can reflect on your season and tell me what I might have missed down in the comment section down below. Now, if you guys want to see more content like this, click this video right here. I think you would enjoy it. Hit this button if you're not already subscribed. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. It really means the world to me that you guys are sticking with the channel. We're growing the channel. We're posting content. And it's really a community and a family in here. Thanks for riding with me. Let's build this thing. Keep going. Take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue passion.